Okay, let's just jump right in. What if I told you that pure energy sent from literally miles away could physically change your blood? Yeah, I know, it sounds like something straight out of sci-fi. But today, we're going to dig into a study that claims it's not fiction at all. It's real. Can quantum energy actually clean your blood? It's a huge question, right? Well, today, we're not just throwing that question out there. We're going to break down a research paper that claims it has the answer. So let's get into the source material for this explainer. So where did this come from? Our source is a report from an Austrian organization called IFVBESA. They ran a whole study on a technology from a company, Lila Quantum Tech, and they were looking specifically at what it does to live blood, watching it in real time under a dark field microscope. Okay, so before we can even get to the results of the study, we have to understand what exactly the researchers were looking for. And it all starts with a pretty unique definition of what a parasite is. See, the whole analysis in this report is built on the work of two scientists, Antoine Béchamp and Günter Enderlein. Now, full disclosure, their theories are, let's just say they're not exactly mainstream science. But for this study, they are absolutely fundamental. You have to understand their ideas to get what's going on here. This quote from Enderlein really gets to the heart of it. He had this theory that we've all got these tiny little organisms inside us he called endobionts. And, when you're healthy, no big deal, they're harmless. But when your body's internal environment gets stressed out, his theory is that these same little guys can actually evolve into much bigger, more complex, and harmful parasites. And this whole process has a name, cyclogeny. It's this idea that a microbe isn't just one thing. It can literally change its form, morph from something harmless to something pathogenic, something that makes you sick. And it all depends on the environment inside your body, what the report calls the milieu. So let's be super clear here. The study isn't looking for germs or viruses that got in from the outside. It's looking for things that were already inside and transformed. Okay, so if the problem is this unhealthy internal environment, what's the fix? Well, this is where the technology comes in. The study was designed to test something they call the quantum upgrade. So how does it supposedly work? The claim is that it uses quantum entanglement. The report explains this as, that weird phenomenon where two particles get linked together. And once they're linked, anything you do to one of them instantly affects the other one, no matter how far apart they are. Miles, continents, it doesn't matter. And the big idea here is that a person, you, me, anyone, can be energetically entangled with some kind of central quantum energy source. And if that's true, then in theory, you could be influenced by that source from literally anywhere. It just bypasses distance completely. So what does this entanglement do? According to the report, it feeds the body extra quantum energy. And the paper makes this really interesting comparison to Newton's law of inertia. How an object at rest stays at rest. Well, they argue a biological system can get stuck in an unhealthy state, and it needs a little push, an external energy input, to get it moving in a positive direction again. So let's recap. We've got a pretty unconventional theory of disease, right? And this very high-tech quantum solution. So how on earth did they actually test this? Let's dive into the study's design. The method itself was actually pretty straightforward. They got 24 people for a randomized double-blind study. That's the gold standard. First, they took a before blood sample from everyone's fingertip and looked at it right away. Then, the subjects were exposed to this quantum upgrade through entanglement for a few months. And after that time, they took another blood sample, an after sample, to see if anything had changed. All right, before I show you the pictures, we need a quick lesson on what the researchers were actually looking for. They were scanning for these really specific markers of stress in the blood. So you'll hear about symplasts. Those are basically clumps of that internal material we talked about. Then there's anicytosis, which is just a fancy word for red blood cells being all different sizes. And finally, phylidization. These are like little filament networks in the blood that they say are a sign of stress. Okay, this is the part you've been waiting for, the visual evidence, the actual before and after pictures from under the microscope. Let's take a look at what the study has to show us. Okay, first up, this is a blood sample from one of the subjects before they had any exposure to this quantum upgrade. So in this image, the researchers are pointing out what they call symplasts. You see those big kind of clustered areas? They say this is evidence of a highly pathogenic state. Basically, early-stage parasitic development, according to their theory. They also point out how a lot of the red blood cells are irregularly shaped. And now, let's see the after. This is a sample from someone who was exposed for 4 months, and the study says this is a pretty typical result they saw. And according to their analysis, the difference is, well, it's pretty dramatic. The authors actually use the word harmonized to describe this blood. They point out that the red blood cells have a, quote, marvelous shape, and that all those parasitic factors they saw in the before pictures, they're just not visible anymore. And putting them side by side like this really captures the whole claim of the report, doesn't it? On the left, you've got blood that they say is under pathogenic stress. And on the right, a sample after the exposure, which they describe as being in a harmonized vital state. This visual difference is really the bedrock of the entire study's findings. So, after looking at all these images, what was the bottom line? What did the researchers actually conclude from all this? Well, the report's takeaways are pretty direct. The authors concluded that being exposed to this technology seemed to transform those pathogenic factors they were measuring. They reported seeing better-shaped red blood cells, more active white blood cells, and in the end, they found it had a significant harmonizing effect on the whole environment of the blood. Look, this study presents some pretty extraordinary claims, right? It really challenges how we think about biology, about energy, about distance itself, and it leaves us with this really mind-bending question to chew on. If it's actually possible for energy to connect with us and influence our bodies from anywhere on the planet, well, what are the limits? Where does that influence stop?